President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
2.1% is sort of the weight on GDP, right? That's the negative. Now, the positive, I would say this is the max negative if all 500 bill, disappears, basically. The positive, that's not necessarily the max negative. That's the negative if it all disappears. But there could also be other aspects here. What happens if, because of the tariffs, businesses can't operate anymore in trade and you have layoffs, shock to infrastructure, shock to supply chains, and hiring, etc. Well, in this case, you could actually see a greater. Actual impact could be bigger. So we can't really say that 2.1% is the max impact. The positive, obviously, is that the U.S. would collect that 500 bill, in theory, unless, of course, you have this substantial reduction in actual trade, because now you get counter tariffs. So downsides are counter tariff balance, bankruptcy or collapse of certain businesses, and then of course you have the inflationary impact, inflationary risk. I think that's lower because I think companies have less pricing power, but theoretically that money should go to the U.S. government. Okay, cool. So now the U.S. government has $500 billion. What do they do with that? Well, if they reinvest it into America, then maybe you can get some of that GDP impact back. If they use it to pay off the debt, well, that's good, but you don't necessarily get that money back. Now, if they give it back in the form of, hey, we're doing these tariffs and now we're going to give tax breaks. Yes, in theory, in the longer run, we will be better off, hopefully. Usually tariffs create a deadweight loss from an economic point of view. But the theory is, if it goes to lower taxation, great, but that'll take 1 year, right? So if the tariffs go into effect, as they said, Feb 1, then you get the pain now. So this is one of the problems that in the market that we're in right now, the pain immediacy, or the immediacy of the pain. So deportations, tariffs, job cuts, and layoffs, those things cause economic pain immediately. That is Q1 pain. The upside would actually probably not come until after you pass a tax plan, which maybe it'll happen in Q2 and then it'll be effective Q3, Q4. So the upside probably of tariffs would be Q3 earliest, right? Because you have to collect, reinvest, tax less. So you do create a potential Q1, Q2 hole. And so I think that's what markets are reacting to. Tariffs increase risk. But we'll see. And with the market right now that thinks Trump has mostly been sort of signaling or messaging regarding tariffs and not actually willing to push the tariff button, this is a little bit of a wake-up call. Now, in fairness, he might not have the full plan together yet. They kind of, I feel like, do things a little last minute, and they're like, this is the plan. Fine. I mean, they end up getting a lot done, right? What the impacts of it will be, though, will be studied for a while. They will not immediately be clear. Okay, if you're confused about what's going on with tariffs, those extra taxes that are now going to be on many goods and services between Canada, the United States, Mexico and the United States, and China and the United States, and what's going on with these tariffs, and what institutions are saying, as well as what researchers are saying the impact of the tariffs could be. So let's also just start by saying that many people didn't think that that the tariffs Donald Trump was threatening were just going to be a, threat and a negotiating lever. And that's because if you go back to 2018, you can't really blame the historical context. Donald Trump phased in tariffs. In fact, he slowly worked tariffs up against countries like China and others over many, many months with many, many warnings and time, a long period of time for people to sort of adapt to these tariffs. Now we're literally going from an announcement on January 31st that we're getting tariffs with the preview on the 30th to tariffs taking effect on February 4th, which is less than a week for businesses and people to adapt to these tariffs. And the dollar is skyrocketing. The Canadian dollar has fallen to its lowest trading level since 2003 as these tariffs are being implemented, boom, relatively rapidly. I mean, like really rapidly. People now expect that tariffs are going to impact about $1.3 trillion of U.S. imports. That would represent about 43% of U.S. imports and about 5% of GDP. That's a lot that is going to be affected by tariffs because it's not just the tariff items that are targeted, but then materials that go into those targeted items and the trade back and forth. Average tariff rates across the United States are now expected to rise from 3% to 10.7%. Some people think that gas prices are immediately going to start rising by as much as 70 cents to maybe even over $1 very rapidly as a result of this. This is even in spite of the fact that Trump is encouraging, or I should say implementing, lower tariffs on Canadian energy than he is on Canada in general. See, Canada in general is going to get a 25% tariff, but on oil that they send us, or natural gas, there'll only be a 10% tariff. Got it. 25% tariffs on Mexican products, 10% on China. And let's just say there is a little note in the Trumpian executive orders that creates even more nervousness. See, Goldman Sachs rightly pointed out this in their note this morning. They said the problem with these tariffs is that the tariffs that Trump has implemented include a retaliation clause. It says, quote, if a country chooses to retaliate against the United States in response to this action through import duties on the United States exports or similar measures, the president may increase or expand in scope the duties imposed under this order to ensure the efficacy of this action. In other words, hey, if you tariff us back, we'll bump the tariffs even more against you. Now, the Federal Reserve argues that these tariffs could end up knocking 1.2% off of GDP and adding 0.7% to core PCE, inflation. Goldman thinks 0.7% of GDP is going away. Some people think more of GDP is going away. Some people think less of GDP is going away. But let's just put it this way. Everybody is in agreement that this will be a net negative to gross domestic product. So in other words, it just pushes you closer to recession. That tariffs are particularly costly relative to many other public policies. Like, if you're gonna choose a tool, this is kind of an expensive tool to use to try to gain tax revenue. As we said, we're only expecting to get $1 for every $1.50 in cost that we hit here. So this idea that, oh, tariffs are going to help pay for no income tax in the United States is loony. The idea that it'll pay for some income taxes in the United States is much more reasonable, but also unlikely given that the cost is probably going to end up being higher, especially since we're playing this sort of tit-for-tat escalation game right now, where first the United States issues tariffs, then we expect retaliatory tariffs, as Canada has already announced. China and Mexico are expected to announce as well. And then the U.S. is already preempting that if you retaliate, we will raise our tariffs. Donald Trump said that tariffs on the EU will, quote, absolutely follow these tariffs against Mexico, Canada, and China. Remember that currently our largest trade deficit in the world is with this little country called Germany. I was born in Germany. And they are obviously a huge part of the European Union. Now, the reason I bring them up is because it would make sense that if they're the largest, then we should be expecting tariffs against Europe as well. And the European Union is already threatening counter tariffs in advance of Donald Trump announcing tariffs. So first, how tariffs work. Let's say I buy this, $20 mug from China, and I import it into the United States to go resell it on my Etsy store, okay? It's a pretty cool mug. Yeah, got to get the Transformers going. I think it's awesome. All right. Well, because it's under $800, it's mostly exempt from duties or tariffs or taxes or whatever when it gets imported. Well, that's going away on Tuesday. They're just going to kill that. Yeah, JK, no more de minimis exemption. So this will now also get hit by the 10% tariffs going from China. If it came from Mexico, 25%, and so on. So that's going to hurt the Temus, the Alibabas, the I don't know, all the little, smaller product stores that we buy things from China. Okay, so that's going to be another hit. But think about also, imagine this transformer was actually a container ship full of stuff that's going to get loaded into Walmart or Target. Well, when that container shows up and Target says, yeah, it has a value of $1 million, all the goods in there, it's obviously going to be a lot more, but let's just say $1 million. Well, then at the border, our Border Patrol now gets to say, all right, where's our $250,000? Assuming it came from Mexico or Canada, or $100,000 if it came from China. Well, somebody's got to pay for that. So it could be the manufacturers of all the stuff in the container. It could be the Walmart or Target. It could be both. It's kind of like, when the company offers you free shipping, it's included in the cost of the product they're selling you, leading to product inflation. But that depends on pricing power of that product. So then you wonder, are they just going to have another line item that's like, yeah, we'll sell you this for the normal price, but you got to pay the tariff, or we'll split the tariff. And then you wonder what happens with companies that are like, okay, we have to absorb the margin because we're in a competitive environment. Maybe we're selling bicycles or whatever, and we have to absorb the 25%. Well, what happens? Well, if our margins are 20%, we now go negative on every bike we sell. Let's stop selling bikes. Let's go bankrupt. Donald Trump says he's decided to charge reciprocal tariffs. We've already heard about that. Basically, his argument is if you charge us a tariff, we will tariff you. Now, what's interesting is he's actually now changed the definition of a tariff a little bit in that he's arguing VAT taxes or value-added taxes will be considered a form of a tariff. So, for example, if you sell American-made Texas Instrument calculators for, $10 in Europe, and they charge a VAT tax of 18%, then that could be potentially seen as a tariff. So Donald Trump is making the argument that any country that adds value-added taxes could have tariffs. So Canada sits at about 5%, just to list a few. Japan and Australia are at 10%. Switzerland, 8.1%. Luxembourg, 18%. Germany, Cyprus, Romania, 19%, right? These are all the value-added taxes that they have, right? I just want to be clear. It's not like Trump is saying, oh, yeah, that's going to be the tax amount here. And I'll explain sort of what they're announcing here. This is just to give you an idea of what the value-added taxes are. Most of these are honestly in Europe, the value-added taxes. Poland, Portugal, Slovakia, those are all 23%ers. The European Union has been charging a 10% tariff on American cars that are imported. So like Fords that go to Europe, 10% tariff, right? Well, the United States only charges a 2.5% tariff on EU cars coming in. So this is where a lot of people are saying, okay, why is there a 7.5% difference here? Donald Trump has been pressuring the European Union, and the European Union is expected to reduce tariffs on American vehicles to just 2.5%. And so now you're equal, right? So we get taxed at 10%, they tax at 10%. Now we're equalizing it to 2.5. Now you don't have an imbalance anymore. And the idea is that, hey, if you get to balance, you don't actually need to tariff that country anymore. So Trump isn't, at least is what he's saying, he's not trying to make this argument that, we should tariff other countries more than they tariff us. Instead, he's saying we should just equal it out or level the playing field again, or his words. India has more tariffs than nearly any other countries. Asked if consumers can expect higher prices, he says not necessarily. Expect jobs to go up. Prices could go up somewhat in the short term, says Trump. Interest rates are going to go down. Trump says he expects a lot of countries' tariffs to stay the same. However, Canada's paying the lowest fee for NATO, and he doesn't expect any exemptions or waivers